Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this edition of LiR Confidential on LiR Media. We have our usual email, info@lirmedia.tv for all your comments, and press the red button on the right-hand side to subscribe to our channel. It's free of charge. You won't get much free in the world today, but that's free of charge. I'm delighted to welcome this morning into studio, remotely speaking, Mr. Barry Shaw, all the way from Israel. Good morning, good afternoon, Barry, in your time there, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Good to be on.
Now, Barry Shaw is, as I said, our special guest today. He's a former member of the Knesset Forum on Israel's legitimization. And Barry is the host of, wait for it, The View from Israel. And it's also the International Public Diplomacy Director for the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. And if that wasn't enough, he's also written a few books in his spare time. And I'll just name out a few of the titles, and we'll go through those later on in the program, Barry.
Okay.
BDS for Idiots. Now, I think that should be a book that should be read by everybody, particularly a lot of the idiots in the country that I'm living in anyway, when it comes to the state of Israel. Israel Reclaiming the Narrative is another one of Barry's poems. Fighting Hamas, BDS, and Anti-Semitism. 1917 from Palestine to the Land of Israel. And then A Tale of Love and Destiny. That took my eye. I was reading about it. We'll get to those later on. And as I said, welcome, Barry. And how do you get the time to even get up in the morning and put your 2 feet on the floor with all that activity?
My wife tells me she never sees me.
That's the recipe for a happy marriage. Well, where did you grow up, Barry?
I was born and raised in Manchester. I worked in various jobs. I even, in the good old days, had a pop group, a rock group called the Zodiacs, when all the best music of the world was coming from Manchester and Liverpool. That was a fun time. Then I got a bit more serious, where I took up a job as a regional sales manager for a couple of engineering companies. I was involved in sport, running, mainly distance running, competing in events up to marathons in the UK. And apart from that, as you said, getting married, raising 3 kids, and earning an honest living.
Now, when did you settle in Israel?
Well, the story there was I was selected to run in what's called the Maccabean Games. This is like, they call it the Jewish Olympics that they have in Israel every 4 years.
Right.
And I guess I made a bit of a mistake because I took my wife with me. So I was training and competing. My wife was ensconced in a hotel in Netanya on the Mediterranean coast. And it ended up that I came back without winning a medal, but with a wife who was insisting that we pack up and go and live in Israel.
Go where?
I don't know what it's like over there, but sometimes, you know, if you get a wife nagging you for something, it's like water dripping on a rock. And eventually she bored a hole in my mind. But that was really partly to a couple of things as well, because what happened that really decided me to make the move, one of the things that happened was that the Yom Kippur War happened when I was in Britain. And like any good Jewish lad, on Yom Kippur, I don't know if you know, but it's like a fast day for the Jewish people.
Yes, I do.
A day of retrospect. And I remember being in a synagogue in Bury, which is near north of Prestwich, and people coming in the afternoon and said the Arabs have attacked Israel. And we were all anxious to find out what was going on. This came as a surprise, the Yom Kippur War. And when we went home after this fast, rather than immediately dive into a meal because we hadn't eaten for a day, we turned on the BBC. And all we heard there was the talking heads in the studio talking about how this war is going to affect the price of petrol in the cars. And I was saying, come on, what's happened to Israel? 5 Arab armies had attacked this little state, basically, for the second time. And we wanted to know what happened. And they were too busy talking about that. Eventually, I got some news that this war lasted 6 days. 6 days.
I remember that.
And I said, you know, this is a miraculous country. Having been there, we tasted it. So I said to my wife, Carol, okay, we've won. Well, pack up and go there to live. So we did. And we spent a lot of time on kibbutz. And while I was there, I was encouraging a lot of runners from abroad to come to Israel. I arranged them to be on kibbutz during the winter and enjoy their winter training. I had some people from England, like David Bedford, who was quite famous at that time, and other people.
Yeah, fantastic athlete, David Bedford, yeah.
So, but what happened then, after about a year there, my wife got a sort of a culture shock. It's a complete change of gears, the life over there. It really can be overwhelming. So after a year or so, actually, we came back. And then some other things happened over here, which weren't so pleasant. I got back into work, and then I began to get, again, a lot of the snide anti-Semitic remarks from certain people that I was working with, and I had to have meetings, and we had conventions, and we went to the bars at night. And one of the people was making particularly nasty remarks about the Jews and everything, referring to the past war and everything. And I sort of made a remark, you wouldn't recognize a Jew if you looked at one. And he said, well, why, you one? I said, yes, I am. So he told me, so bugger off to Palestine where you belong.
Right.
And that sort of lingered with me. It reminded me of the days of when I was at school, and the kids used to pick on the few Jewish kids, including myself, and give us the old traditional torture called the Iron Lady. Don't know if you know what the Iron Lady is. You pick on somebody weaker than yourself, and you pull his arms through the iron railings to inflict pain over there. And I remember getting into a fight with them. And these memories flooded back to me at that time. And we were hauled into the headmaster. And I could protest. These guys were torturing me, sir. Doesn't matter. We all got the cane. So, you know, whether you're the perpetrator or the victim, you get punished. So I went back to my wife and I said, right, we're back again. We can't do this, keep this ping pong. We'll go back a second time with the kids. And we went back to kibbutz. And then eventually I left kibbutz. So this is another chapter in the story.
And, you know, I don't have to say it to you, obviously, but for us people, no matter what country in Europe we're in, I cannot comprehend, because I'm not a Jew, obviously, but I have an understanding, the appalling anti-Semitism, particularly with the history of what we did to those people, and many not so very long ago in this continent, and to have people standing up in Parliament with their anti-Semitic rants and ignorance, to me in 2022 is anathema to civilization, to so-called progress, Barry, of mankind. It's just simply shocking to me, you know, and I can only guess what it's like to being Jewish and listening. And we don't have a very healthy history in this country, I have to hasten to add, unfortunately. But I mean, really, Barry, I mean, growing up as a Jew, what, you know what, I didn't understand much until I went to Israel. My daughter and husband were working in Haifa, and that's where I spent most of my time. You have to go there, as much as often as you can, sit in the coffee shops with what we call ordinary folk who are going around their business. You know, sit with the shopkeepers, sit with the butchers, have a chance to chat to them, and travel on the buses and do the best you can. Then you get a sense of the place, of the magnificence of the people. Politics is one thing and conflict, but I'm talking about the generality of people living in a country like Israel. And people should never forget that that country is surrounded by countries that are run by despots and dictators and every kind of a shade of a terrorist organization. So really, and I'm not saying that there's no blame on the state of Israel and the politics and all. Of course there is, but I'm just saying people should have a sense of the history of the place and really stop this ignorant rhetoric, you know? And for you, the BDS movement, I even forget what BDS stands for, boycott, divest, and
sanctions.
Sanctions. Now, you wrote that book, BDS for Idiots. I mean, I think a copy of that book should be given to all of our 160 members of our parliament in this republic, for a start anyway, you know, and send them the bill with it, the invoice, and they can send you the receipt as well, I think. But how did you come to write that, or why did you write it?
That came about because I am living in Israel and having an experience from being in Britain as well. I saw that the anti-Semitism that I spoke of earlier, which was a sort of a snide anti-Semitism, got larger and larger as Israel was forced more and more to take steps in order to defend ourselves from constant attacks. Yeah. And it came about because, you know, there's a sort of an expression that Jewish people know, because I spoke about one sort of holiday. There's another one called the Passover, right? And during what we call the Seder night, which is all the family together, we go through this ancient book to do with the Passover Seder night. There's an expression in there which says, and I quote, I've got it here. It's a prayer which is called in Hebrew, V'hi Shemda, right? And it says basically one sentence strikes out. In every generation, there arises somebody coming to destroy us. And if you go back over 3,000 years of Jewish history, you see this. Yes. So, you know, having fought back against 5 Arab armies miraculously from starting to be a nation state, we found that the Arabs changed their tactic, and they changed one in the figure of, I suppose, Yasser Arafat, who became the figurehead for what was called the Palestinian movement. And the Arabs who hated and wanted to destroy Israel, but was unable to do so, say that we will use this Palestine Liberation Organization of Yasser Arafat as our frontman, our figurehead, to poke and stab and kill and gradually destroy Israel, the Jewish state. And Yasser Arafat was to us an arch terrorist. But the world was forcing us to make steps in order to accommodate this Palestinian entity, which we did. But even as we were doing that, we were being attacked by the Arafat supporters from abroad who were picking on Israel, the Jewish state, beyond what I would have thought was reason. So, and they started a boycott movement, not against the Palestinians for killing Jews, not against the Palestinians who had in their charter the desire not only to kill Jews. Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind that tree, go out and kill him. Yeah. And a code that says, you know, we are there, we will continue until the Jewish state is no longer exist. And I would have thought anybody who was really interested in human rights or suffering would have looked at the Jews and said, you know, they're deserving of some sort of support. You know, if the Palestinians want a state, let them have it, but let them first of all agree to live alongside the Jewish state of Israel. But they never said that. Yes. They took a completely different approach.
They did, and as you said, Yasser Arafat. There were so many attempts internationally to broker what we call an honest settlement between both sides. I don't have to spout history to you about it. Going down from the early Camp David Accord and going away down the consistent and persistent reaching out to Arafat and the PLO, the millions and millions and millions of dollars that were given to them and money by the UN to Arafat. And yes, they remained fundamentally implacable in their hatred and their wanton destruction of Israel. That was going on all the time while they were being funded by the international community.
Well, again, going back to answer your question, at first, when I got involved in this work in answering the people like the boycotters and their hypocrisy, I wrote an article in the early, I guess it's about 13, 14 years ago, maybe now, that went viral over sort of early social media. And I called the article, "If you're going to boycott Israel, do it properly." And by that, I mean, okay, you boycotters, you're insistent that people have to boycott Israel. You want to do that? How about setting an example? Throw away your mobile phone because it's got Israeli technology, and without that, you're supporting Israel. Throw away all other sorts of communication that you've got because it's got Israeli technology.
Yeah.
You start getting sick. Check your medication and check if you're going into hospital what the doctors are doing to you, because a lot of the medication and the medical science comes from Israel. So
Yes.
if you're going to boycott Israel, do it properly.
Exactly.
But it was meant in jest. But as I said, the situation got considerably worse. And it got to the point where, for instance, the United Nations were having a conference against racism in South Africa. And thousands of anti-Israel, I would say anti-Semites, descended on Durban in South Africa and lobbied the United Nations to introduce a resolution saying Zionism is racism. And this was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly, and it took Israel 17 years to get it off the books. Now, when you're talking about Israel being a racist state by these people who are supporting the Palestinians, I started pointing out how ridiculous this was.
Absolutely.
Because if you look at Israel, I think, this is really started because the people who started this were not the Arabs living abroad, but it was the white Marxist leftist socialists, the people like the Corbyns of the world, or maybe people in the Sinn Féin, for instance, who have a different sort of agenda, which is again anti-Semitism. And I began to make reminding people that if you say that Israel is a racist state, or even apartheid state, which became the new word for that, because they came. Yeah, they came out of South Africa. Oh, South Africa had an apartheid. Now, Israel practices an apartheid even worse than the apartheid of South Africa. And Israel was more Nazi than the Nazis. And when you get a conversation like that, or criticism, I think we need to find a different word for criticism.
You do, yeah, you do. It's ridiculous.
And when Israel becomes a state unlike any other state, to be pilloried even in the United Nations, worse than any other state, you have to ask yourself, what sort of hell did this state, this country, come from that it needs to be pilloried so badly? So I began to invest my time looking into it and speaking to the experts and learning what was going on here. And one of the things that I found, sadly, is the hypocrisy, and it's the selective use of language. Now, they say Israel is a racist state while supporting the Palestinians. So I was writing and speaking about making a comparison. Do you really know what constitutes Israel? Yes, you could call it the Jewish state. And yes, it was initially the established as the reestablishment the reconfiguration of the national home of the Jewish people, and we are the majority. But in our country, we have 20% of our country are Arab, and apart from Arabs, we have Maronite Christians, we have Druze, we have Bedouin, we have Christians, we have Muslims, we have Jews. And because of our commitment to not only to the, let's say, the Balfour Declaration, and our own values, to give equal rights and freedom of expression and freedom of worship to minorities. So we have this. So I ask the hypocrites, the boycotters, if you call us a racist state, what do you call all the surrounding states that surround Israel? For instance, the Palestinians. And I ask some simple questions. How many Jews live in Ramallah? How many Jews live in the Gaza Strip? How many Jews live in Jenin, headed by the Palestinian Authority or Hamas? The answer is zero, none. How many Jews live in Jordan? None. How many Jews live in Lebanon? None. How many Jews live in Syria? None. So if you're looking for a racist state, are they not racist? How come you never protest?
I mean, it's no one singular fault, but nevertheless, there isn't enough attention paid to people that make statements, particularly on television programs and radio programs. They're left to get away with making statements that are simply not true. Anybody that walks down the streets of Tel Aviv or Haifa or wherever you go, Jerusalem, you cannot but be absolutely confronted with the diversity of people you meet and speak to in Israel today. As you said, Barry, the diversity of people and all the different religious people and all the different nationalities are represented in that country and living in harmony. By the most part, people, I'm perplexed, as not being a Jew, I'm perplexed at we have to call out this rabid anti-Semitism. It's insidious, and for it still to be going on today is so sad and so horrific that I wonder, do people not pay attention to what they say anymore? Are they looking for like Corbyn, when Corbyn, he almost single-handedly destroyed the Labour Party, you know, because that party in Britain, as you know, most of the people, most of the Jewish community in Britain, in Great Britain, identified with the principles and the ethos of the Labour Party. Now, we're not speaking about the Labour Party today, as you well know, we're speaking about going way back. And they found a home and a comfort in that party, politically speaking. And what it was turned into under Corbyn is very sad, really. It's very sad in one way. And now, you know, you can see what it is. I don't know, the politics of it. Now, in Israel itself today, the connection between Israel and Palestine. Now, as we know, Israel came into being in 1948. Everybody knows our history. When there was a line drawn in the sand and you live there and you live there. These things very, very seldom work, as we know in history, you know. You draw a line there, Barry, and you stay that side and I stay that side. They should have been more consideration and more understanding given to the tribal aspect of when they were dividing up these places. I know they had to do something. I know they had to do something when they were I suppose, trying to find a home. In 1948 was just after the Second World War, as we know, and the horrors that those people went through. And my colleague Mary here on the station with us has done an immense amount of work, and her PhD is on childhood experiences under Nazism, and she's written a book on it now, and she's spoken to an awful lot of survivors of the Holocaust as well.
They also use their language against us, and they like quoting legal language, or they assume it's legal language by assuming an illegality of things that Israel does, or that really has no foundation in fact. And again, part of my research has been to find out the legitimacy of Israel's claim to the land of Israel. The legitimacy between Israel's claim for Jerusalem as its capital. And I spoke to a lot of experts, global experts, Jacques Gautier, who dedicated 25 years of his life in a research called Whose Jerusalem, for instance.
Yes.
But I think it's important also perhaps to remind your listeners, your viewers, at this opportunity to correct a lot of misconceptions they talk about Israel with regard to legality and illegality, because they constantly make wild accusations that Israel is illegally occupying Palestine, and Israel's illegal occupation and illegal settlements. And they quote things like the Geneva Convention, as if Israel has no legitimacy to the land. But we have several key important moments in history of legality that need repeating. And I don't think, quite frankly, and it would possibly help some of your viewers and your followers to clarify the situation if they didn't know about it. For instance, where does this Israel's legality to Palestine come from? Now, some might say, and I wrote about it in one of the books, 1917, From Palestine to the Land of Israel. On the back of the book, I deliberately put there the Balfour Declaration, which states here, this is on behalf of the British government, I have much pleasure in conveying to you and on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, and therefore saying the cabinet, this is the British cabinet, His Majesty's government, view with favor at this time, and this is going back 1917, right? The establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing should be done that will prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. That was but the legitimacy of Israel doesn't stand on the Balfour Declaration.
No.
What it did stand on is after the First World War, when the British won the Palestine campaign as part of the First World War, and destroyed the Ottoman Empire, which was raging against the Allies together with the Germans. You had what was then called the Ottoman Empire. And part of that Ottoman Empire was a massive, more or less barren districts of Palestine, which led from the river over to the Jordan Valley, to the other side of the Jordan River, up to including Syria and Lebanon. Huge tract of land. Right? But what happened then? The world came together, the world leaders, not the Jewish leaders or not the Zionist leaders, the dispassionate world leaders came together in a place that a lot of people never heard about, called San Remo in 1920. San Remo is a tourist town on the Italian Mediterranean coast, not far from Monaco. And they came up there, these world leaders, including Japan, came up with the administration of Palestine while ensuring that the rights and positions of other sections of the Palestinian population is not prejudiced, shall facilitate Jewish immigration under suitable condition and shall encourage, in cooperation with the Jewish agency referred to in Article 7, and close settlement by Jews on the land. I repeat, close settlement by Jews on the land of Palestine, including state land and wasteland not required for public purposes. Now, that commitment of the world bodies didn't stop there. It went 2 years later to the League of Nations in Geneva, 1922. What was the League of Nations? The League of Nations was the forerunner of the United Nations.
That's right.
Again, it wasn't a Jewish or Christian body. It was the world leaders who decided in 1922 that says, except as may be agreed in the individual trusteeship agreements made under Article 77, 78, 70, and 81, placing each territory under the trusteeships, and until such agreements have been concluded, nothing in this chapter shall be construed or of itself to alter any manner whatsoever on any states. What did they decide in the League of Nations? They created the Jewish homeland in Palestine. They created Transjordan. They created Syria. They created Lebanon. They created Iraq, was called at that time Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
Each one had a mandate. Now, nobody has ever disputed the mandates for all the other places. It's only the Jewish one that they criticize and say illegal. It's not illegal. It had two guaranteed legitimate stamps. One was the San Remo, the other one was the League of Nations. And to cap it all, when the League of Nations was disbanding and handing the reins over to the United Nations, in the founding charter of the United Nations, Article 80, it says nothing will be done in the United Nations that would cancel any agreements and treaties passed and delivered by the League of Nations. And that legitimacy stands until today.
And as you said, my special guest is Barry Shaw, and we're speaking about Israel and all things that Barry is involved in. And LiR Confidential is the program. Our email is info@lirmedia.tv, and press the red button to subscribe to our channel. Of course, Barry, as you said there, take you up the strand of when I hear this as well, it's illegal occupation, illegal settlements. If that's illegal, as you said, to bring it down to brass tacks, all the other legitimate drawings of countries and places like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon are all illegal.
Let me give also the legal definition of that one, because I'm not, they give the gossip. I quote the facts. I quote the law. They quote the Geneva Convention, right? So let me tell you, and also the legal scholars have looked into this. The Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49, individual or mass forcible transfers, as well as deportations of protected persons from occupied territories to the territory of the occupied power or that of any other country, occupied or not, are prohibited regardless of their motive. Okay? Now, they talked about deportations of protected people from occupied territory to the territory of the occupied power, right? And there's another one where they talk about, another paragraph where they talk about deportations or transfers, right? They never mention settlements anywhere in this. By the way, the word settlement, the English word settlement, derives from a Hebrew word called yeshuv, which means a small town or to create a town, right? Yeah. That's the English, but there is no definition anywhere which talks about the illegal occupation of Israel. Why? Because as I quoted from the historic legitimacies from San Remo, the League of Nations, and also the United Nations, the definition and the boundaries of Palestine were from, not only from the Mediterranean Sea to the river, but beyond the River Jordan, into Jordan itself. That was Palestine. But there was an agreement made between the Zionists, in this case, Chaim Weizmann and Faisal, that the Zionists, the Jews, would agree, if an agreement is made, that we, the Israelis, despite the fact that we are entitled to Palestine beyond the River Jordan, to the east of the River Jordan, that we will hold back on that. And this enables Winston Churchill to give what was east of the River Jordan to Faisal. We became known as Transjordan, right?
Right, that's right.
But I want to make the point here, and this is a point these anti-Israel, pro-Palestinians never talk about. And that is that Jordan is Palestine. It was all Palestine. The Arabs were there. It was part of Palestine. And Israel said, you know what? You have this. Let the Arabs have it. Let them create their own Palestine. But there was no Palestine created there. It was given to a Hashemite king. And the Hashemites these days are less than 10% of the population of Jordan. Guess who 80 to 90% are of Jordan? They are Palestinians.
That's right.
They are Palestinians. So I make this case all the time. When, if ever I'm, let's say, confronted, I don't go out and look for them. Let me give you an anecdote before you go on. I often go abroad until we had COVID and talk to audiences, Jewish audiences, Christian audiences, also students, before some of the student bodies won't allow me on the campuses anymore because they want to close me down. But I was in Amsterdam and I gave a talk at what's called the Jewish Liberal Center in Amsterdam. And my talk was infiltrated by 3 of the leading members of the BDS, Boycotts, Divestments and Sanctions in Holland. One of them had a sticker over here, BDS, and another one on his arm. So I gave my 40-minute talk about Israel, what it's doing these days and everything. And then we came to the Q&A.
Oh, yes.
And then this guy put his hand up, so I allowed him to speak. And he didn't ask a question. He went on the rant about Israel being illegal occupied. And he was talking at that time, I don't know if you remember, he was talking about the poor Palestinians and Israel imposing an illegal blockade on Gaza, and the poor Palestinians in Gaza have nowhere to eat, nowhere to go, nowhere everything. So I heard his talk, and then I said to him, first of all, you're wrong about what you say in an illegal blockade, because it's not illegal. But having listening to you, I want to point out of how you really, quite frankly, I told him, don't give a damn for the Palestinians, but you're also telling lies. And then I have to question why you're telling these lies. So I said, well, let me ask you a question. You talk about an illegal blockade of Gaza at that time. Yeah. I said to him, how many trucks a day go into Gaza from Israel if we have this illegal blockade?
Yeah.
And he wouldn't answer. Now I said to him, so come on, give me an answer, because if you say illegal blockade, you would tell me no trucks go in because it's a blockade, right? So come up with a number. And I want to tell you, the reason I make this sort of argument, because there's an opportunity there, not to win him over, because you will never win over these haters and these boneheads, but it's the audience that are sitting there who don't get the information. Exactly. It's important for anybody trying to make the case for Israel to try and win over the hearts and minds of the people who don't get the information. So I told him, I said, there are 800 trucks a day going in from Israel into the Gaza Strip. What sort of blockade, legal or illegal, is that when we're providing the Gazans over the resistance of the Hamas who are ruling them, 800 trucks a day, and it could be more if Hamas would be more cooperative. And I said, but let me tell you where you don't you don't really care anything for the Palestinians and why you begin to be anti-Semitic. Because if you talk about an illegal blockade of Gaza, tell me, on the other side of the border with Gaza, there's Egypt, okay? Egypt, how many trucks a day go into Egypt at that time, into the Gaza Strip? And I waited. He didn't want to answer. So I waited just to create this dramatic pause, if you want to call it that. And I told him, I will tell you how many trucks a day go into Gaza from Egypt. Zippo. None. And they had smuggling tunnels, and the Egyptians flooded them all. So I said, if you care about the Palestinians and you care about illegal blockades, why haven't you protested outside the Egyptian embassy in The Hague in your country?
Yeah.
Or why don't you protest in Dam Square? Because every Sunday or Saturday, you go there and with your Palestinian flags, and pillory Israel and not that. And I said, okay, so if you don't care about Palestinian when it comes to Egypt, how about Jordan? And I made the case that I made to you. 80% of Palestinians, of Jordanians, are Palestinians. Why aren't you making the case for Jordan is Palestine? And then I pointed to Syria as the third one. And it just so happens that 3 weeks before I went there, Assad, with the help of Russia, had been barrel bombing the Syrian civilians, particularly in parts of Syria where there were Palestinians living. And there was a reported 3,000 Palestinians killed. And I pointed this out in front of the audience. When have you protested on behalf of the Palestinians outside the Syrian embassy?
Yeah.
Not at all. So you don't care when this is happening to Palestinians in Jordan, in Syria, and Egypt. So you're limiting your pro-Palestinian things in order to treat on Israel, the Jewish state, with all sorts of lies and really, really ridiculous sort of arguments. And I said, this makes you an anti-Semite.
Indeed, and my special guest this morning on the LiR Confidential is Barry Shaw. Now, Barry, what do you think of the fact, what is the long-term or the short-term or medium-term answer, if there is an answer, to this set situation between Israel and, we call it, Palestine? I know Palestine is used, we know the context it's used in incorrectly, historically speaking, but for the purpose of the program, so that we won't lose our audience completely in the milieu of history, that what would be in your mind, the arrangements that could be come to between Israel and the Arabs, really, what we're talking about, really, those people?
I want to thank you, first of all, for asking that question, because often when I'm talking on other shows or whatever, they don't ask that question. And it's a vital question. It may be the pivotal question. Look, a lot of people think that the only answer is a two-state solution. But let me give you a bit of background. Again, I come back to the Israeli anti-Israel critics, let's say, who said it's really Israel's fault because we've done nothing for the Palestinians, the poor Palestinians. If only Israel would do more for the Palestinians. We have this argument still in these last few days and going forward as well. So I want to give you and your viewers just a brief idea of what Israel has actually given to the Palestinians for peace. For instance, Israel withdrew to a lot of territory, which we call Judea and Samaria, what the world called the West Bank. We also controlled the Gaza Strip. We took out all our army, and we physically removed 9,000 Jewish Israelis from the Gaza Strip, who had built the most remarkable agricultural infrastructure there.
Yes.
And luxury houses, let's say, on the sea. We pulled them all out. And this was under a right-wing prime minister, Ariel Sharon. And we handed it over to the Palestinian Authority in a search for peace. Not one Jew there. What did they do with the Gaza Strip in return for peace? In return for the infrastructure? You would have thought they would say to the Israeli innovators, come and help us develop the Gaza Strip into something really prosperous and fruitful and productive. No, what happened in the Gaza Strip when we pulled out was that the Palestinian Authority had an election, and guess who won the election?
Hamas.
Right? And the Palestinian Authority came to exert their authority in the Gaza Strip, and they had a civil war there. And Palestinians were killing Palestinians, and Hamas won. And Hamas took these agricultural developments and warehouses and fields and everything, and plowed them underfoot, and built their military wing, if you say, on Israel's border over there. But also, the other thing I want to talk about is knowing that Yasser Arafat was an arch terrorist. And I was, again, I'd served in the IDF. I will give you this admission. I served at that time. We went into Gaza once and we patrolled the border between us and Egypt. And Egypt, people don't know this, but when Egypt put their border there, they actually took a town, an Arab town called Rafah, which is a Palestinian town inside Gaza Strip, and they ripped it in two. So part of the family is on one side of this border, and on the other side is Egypt. And when I was there and we were doing patrol along this border, we saw some Arab families coming to the border, and you have, for instance, a wire fence, and then you have a part where you can see there's any footprints. Then you have the tarmac patrol road, which is the Egyptian one, and then you have another wire fence, and then you have the pill towers with the Egyptian soldiers. And on the other side, you had the people from, I call them Palestinians if you want, the Arabs from Rafah, one part of the family, shouting across to the other one and throwing things over because they need to give them stuff, not bombs or anything. Yeah. Egypt did that, Israel didn't. But let's come back to this. I served in the IDF, and also a part of my running, I'm going to make this anecdote to personalize it. I took a group of Israeli runners to London to compete in the London Marathon. And while I was there, we were met and hosted by the Israeli ambassador, who told us he used to like jogging around Hyde Park or whatever. Yeah. We met him, we did the marathon, we came home. I had some army duty to do. And we were down in the south doing some training. And I went for a run. And I met a friend of mine who was on a kibbutz, and I had a coffee with him, and I ran back. When I got back, the officer said, "Shaw, where have you been? We're moving. Where are we moving to? We're heading north." Why are we heading north? It's because Yasser Arafat's terrorist had killed the Israeli ambassador in London, Shlomo Argov. And the prime minister at the time had said, that's enough. Arafat had been killing kids in Ma'alot in Israel, school children at schools, bombings, suicide bombings from Lebanon. He was in Lebanon. Why was he in Lebanon? Because he had tried to overseat the King Hussein of Jordan, claiming that Jordan is Palestine. And the Jordanian army had wiped him out virtually and expelled him to Lebanon. From there, he'd been terrorizing Israel. So we went in to either get Arafat or deport him. And he ended up in Tunisia, Tunis, by the way.
Yeah.
Where actually Corbyn went to visit and pay a wreath at some terrorists we managed to kill there. Yeah. But in the peace agreement, signed on the Oslo Accord, signed on the White House lawn,
I remember that.
Allowed Arafat to come back from exile into the area. Why? Because he promised us, in his words, peace of the brave. And they gave Arafat a Nobel Peace Prize. And what did he do after we allowed him back into Ramallah to reconstitute his PLO into the Palestinian Authority, to advance peace with us? He inflicted on us the worst and prolonged terror campaign that anybody had ever inflicted on us. Not hundreds, thousands of Israelis were killed or injured. Men, women, and children. They called it the Intifada. And that terror attack came into my hometown, Netanya, over and over and over again, with suicide bombers all over the place. And one of those nearly killed my wife, save for a fortunate telephone call I gave her and told her to come back into the office because I needed her. She would have been blown up at the entrance of the shopping mall that Friday and killed. But also, there was one thing. I opened the talk with you with regard to Passover. We had the Passover Massacre in our Park Hotel. This was when Jews were assembling to commemorate our freedom from slavery in Egypt. Yes. And in walked a Palestinian suicide bomber and killed over 30 Israelis, Jews over there, including some Holocaust survivors and children. and people like that, and injured others. And that was the time where we went into places like Jenin and other places to get rid of Arafat's terrorists. This was after we made peace with him. This is after he said he was going to give us peace of the brave. I want to tell you, he didn't give us peace of the brave, he gave us peace of the grave. And I became the co-founder of the Netanya Terror Victims Organization to try and help those who had been wounded or whatever, or killed, heal from whatever they were doing.
I know.
This is when we do things in order to make peace with the Palestinians, and it's going on to today. So coming back, a long-winded answer to your question.
No problem.
How do we make peace? I want to tell you very quickly that the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, has been the most corrupt, impotent leader of the Palestinian. He has done them no service. He has done zero service in the name of peace. And what he's got into, because he knows he's losing the Palestinian street to Hamas. But you see the Hamas flags in places like Jenin, in places like Birzeit University, where the students overwhelmingly voted for the Hamas representative. Where's Birzeit? Birzeit is not in the Gaza Strip. Birzeit is 5 miles north of where Mahmoud Abbas sits in Ramallah as the head of the Palestinian Authority. And what the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas has been doing is not conditioning their people for peace, but they've got into a competition with Hamas to show the Palestinian people that they can outsmart Hamas in their anti-Semitism, and are giving rewards for the terrorists who kill us in what we call the pay-to-slave policy, in order to compete against Hamas in the war, in the competition to kill Jews and to destroy the Jewish state. And that's where we know. So what can you do for peace? 2 things.
Right.
The diplomats, the International Diplomatic Corps, have got to put aside their 50-year-old waste of time of what they call a 2-state solution based on 1967 lines. It's a non-flyer, because if we try to make another peace with Mahmoud Abbas, we will go to bed with him and we will wake up in the morning with Hamas. And I'll give you one example I'm going to show you physically on the screen, and I can send it to you. Yeah. We went up onto what would be a Palestinian village called Ramtis, which over the 67 border would be part of Palestine, right? Yeah. This is the map, right? On the coast north of Tel Aviv is Netanya, but that's close to Tel Aviv. And we went to this town called Ramtis, and we took a photograph, and it's on the high ground, the topographical high ground. Wow. And when we looked down, and I'm showing you and your viewers, this is what we saw. You know what that is? That and that is Ben Gurion Airport. And the high-rise buildings in the distance is Tel Aviv. This isn't with a binocular, this isn't with a drone, this is actually standing there under our feet. Yeah. Now, are you going to would Israel, everything we've learned over the last 50 years, give that territory to a Palestinian terrorist who's looking through his binoculars and giving instructions on where to send the drones down? If a plane is hit in Ben Gurion Airport, who's going to fly to Israel tomorrow? Which airline?
That's a fair question.
This is another picture we took. A plane taking off from Ben Gurion Airport. This is what you're going to give to the Palestinians in the name for peace? Let me give you a picture that is a 14-minute car drive from where I live. And this main road here is the main 6 road artery running north-south. The other side of this lawn, those buildings you can see at the top, is Tulkarem. Tulkarem is where the terrorists came from to commit the suicide bombings in Netanya. So you're going to say we're going to give, and by the way, this is where the border is today.
Yeah.
That's today. And we're going to give this to the Palestinians. So the international community have got to do one thing very clearly. correct your misconception. And you have to persuade, punish, reward, do whatever you can to the Palestinian Authority to actually convert them into productive peacemakers prepared to accept living alongside a Jewish state and having the Jewish state recognize their rights in wherever they are, and stop this nonsense that Jerusalem is your capital and you're going to have a state from the river to the sea, and then expect Israel to take steps to accommodate them.
I'm just thinking myself that since most of the Palestinians, I know you know what I mean by that, hopefully our viewers do as well, Arabs, Palestinians, since most of them are residing in present-day Jordan, wouldn't it make sense that they would go and reside there?
We'd love to have a utopian world. We're looking for this. And as I pointed out, a lot of the gestures that we've done, you have to bear in mind that also hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are allowed into Israel daily to work over here. Yes, they have to go through checkpoints, because we've had recently another spate of terrorism going on where they come in with axes and explosive devices and machine guns and things like this. So you'll pardon us if we take the necessary steps to defend ourselves. But again, the Palestinians, and quite frankly, your government over there, the British government, the European Union, had to wake up to reality and say your 50-year-old dream of saying we must have a two-state solution on 1967 line, and if Israel never agrees to that, well, we're the obstacle to peace. No, we've known how to give up territory. We gave it up to Jordan. We gave it up to Egypt. We've given it up to the Palestinians, for heaven's sake. And what have they done with it? They've used it as launch pads for the further rockets and everything. And you want to give them right over our borders, over our airport, over our power stations and things like this? Not until we find out that they're amicable peacemakers. Of course, waiting in the wings are one or two other solutions. For instance, there's a solution of not having a two-state solution. Actually, by the way, it won't be a two-state solution, it will be a three-state solution, because you would have Israel, you would have the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah and competing with the Palestinian leadership in the Gaza Strip and fighting each other. So it's a three-state solution. But there's also what a friend of mine, Professor Mordechai Kedar, talks about, is the Palestinian Emirates, which would be an 8-state solution, is actually saying that actually the Palestinians have been let down by their own leadership, both in Ramallah and also in Gaza. So why don't we build up local Palestinian leaderships in certain areas, or even some towns like Jenin or Hebron or Shechem or some other places like that, and then make an arrangement with the Israeli government and also with the Israeli entrepreneurs and everything to have cooperative ventures, and let them have a confederation of Palestinian entities. Call it like, you know, we've just made the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. What's the United Arab Emirates are? There are a number who used to be warring tribes and clans at one time that came together and said, let's work together. Do that with the Palestinians. Let them have their own collective entity. If you want to be connected with Israel, be connected with Israel. If not, not. If you want to be connected with Jordan, be connected with Jordan. But let's have this sort of free exchange of ideas and benefit from Israeli innovation. And just a startup nation. You know, let us train your people, be involved, do things like this.
Right. I'm just wondering, Barry, with the present day setup, will it be a case of waiting for this generation of Palestinian leaders to die off, and the younger, we call more aware or educated generation coming up behind to see the futility of all of this? It's absolutely no good there's no future in it. So just let it go. Like you said, if the UAE can do that, and are prospering as a country and all of that, why can't the same confederation idea be floated and grasped by those people? Because the majority of people are peaceful, as we know. Majority of people in every country are peaceful. It's only the minority and the fanatics and the terrorists, as you said, on the other side. What about Abbas? Like, has he any power at all? Is he interested in doing anything?
Yeah, you're right. And quite frankly, these sort of solutions are not going to happen overnight. Basically, we've waited 50 years chasing a non-solution. I call the two-state solution, certainly based on 67 lines, as trying to drag a dead camel through the burning sands of the desert, because you can see a shimmering oasis in the distance called peace. Yeah. But they haven't realized that that shimmering oasis is a mirage. Not really, because they haven't taken into considerations what's burning underfoot over here. And it's not Israel, because as I said, I've given you examples time and time again of the things that we have put ourselves at risk in order to try and reach out and have a solution. So yes, it depends who replaces Mahmoud Abbas, and I'm not optimistic about that. There may be one or two technocrats who may take over. There was one that may be Mohammed Dahlan, who's a billionaire businessman who could be right, but it's more than likely that if the Palestinian, the PLO, PFLP, which is the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine, that still believes in a Palestine from the river to the sea, they would appoint someone like Marwan Barghouti, who is sitting in an Israeli jail on 5 life sentences for the mass murder of Israelis somewhere, because they still have this mindset that they have to compete with Hamas to win over the street about who is going to stand up and against Israel. No. And basically, it's not just us. It has to be the European governments. It won't happen in the United Nations because they're too biased. It has to be also, even the Irish government has to take a fresh look of this sort of situation. And we have to be patient. And it starts also, by the way, but I have a friend who has spent 20-something years trying to show European governments and the Irish government what's wrong with the UNRWA, which is the United Nations Refugee Works Agency, in their education system that's going on to this day. And the kids, the Palestinian kids who are still being called refugees into their 5th generation, which has never happened before, are being taught to a word in their school books. They have maps in which Israel doesn't exist today, and it's funded by the Irish government, the European Union, and several European governments as well. This is the sort of things that your taxpayers are paying for, to teach Palestinian kids to a world without Israel. It ain't going to happen. So if you want to start that way. Start with the educational systems, as you said. Start with the little kids before their minds are poisoned. Yeah. And also, what you're paying for over there as well is in the summer camps they go to after their schools. They're run by the Palestinians, and they're taught military drills and how to fire weapons. And this is going on now. Is this the way for peace?
No, I mean, as you probably are aware of, we are the Irish government, I'm saying, and not in my name, of course, there's a bill trying to make its way through we have 2 houses of parliament in this country. We have the Senate, the lower house, and we have Dáil Éireann, our Irish parliament, the upper house, which the power is invested in. There's the bill, the Occupied Territories Bill, and you may have heard of it.
It goes, as I mentioned at the beginning, it goes against all legitimacy. All legitimacy.
The Occupied Territories Bill was trying to make its way through our house, but in fairness to the political parties, they put a stop to it for the time being, but it's still there. You know what I mean? It's still sitting there trying to get more support for something as insidious as that, which really, if they really thought about it, practically speaking, if that bill ever saw the light of day, and ever became legal in this country, it would do more harm to the Palestinian people than to Israel at all. I mean, if you only realized what the ignorance of it, I don't know what it is all about. It's another element of anti-Semitism in our country that we should be ashamed of and call it out, you know, but at least that bill has been stopped now, you know, which is very good. But people like you, Barry, and more people like you should be heard more frequently, certainly on the media in this country, on the Irish media, because there isn't enough awareness, understanding, and appreciation of the sheer scale of the problems that are there in that part of the world, and it should not be so.
Let me ask you. I'm happy you raised what you said at the beginning about, and I'm horrified to hear that you're trying to pass this Occupied Territory Act in Ireland. And I want to answer that very, very clearly. You know, if you want to talk about occupation, which is, by the way, they can't find anything in international law talking about occupation. But if you, for instance, you're talking only about an Israeli case over here, and you ignore there are tens, if not hundreds, of occupations going on around the world. Can I mention just a few? For instance, Turkey is occupying northern Cyprus. Morocco is occupying Western Sahara. China is occupying Tibet. Vietnam is occupying parts of Cambodia, etc., etc., etc. Right? But they don't talk about that.
No.
Now your parliament only wants to bring in an occupation law, which really only applies based on the premise that Jews living in Judea and Samaria with biblical and legitimate claims that I spoke about in law, it's legitimate to be living there, and it's part of Israel as mandated to us via, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show. And they're dismissing that as if once they're picking on Israel, once they're picking on the Jews and saying the Jews living in Judea and Samaria is a legal occupation, and we're having a bill only specifically talking about that and not other occupations anywhere else in the world, your Irish Parliament are Jew-hating anti-Semites.
Well, I mean, there's no other word for it, really, and I think that people like yourself should maybe we might sponsor a tour of you around the country and get you speaking time in our, certainly in our third level institutions, really, which is, I mean, they have in Trinity College in Dublin, they have it's just the students' union are so anti-Semitic. I don't know why they're allowed to exist. I really don't. And as you said, in the education system, people should be more aware of our third level institutions, more aware of the young people, the so-called leaders of the future. I mean, if they are being poisoned with this pill of appalling anti-Semitism, what is the future going to hold for those people, you know? I don't know, Barry, myself, what the answer is. I really don't, but having been there and having walked around the place, both old and new in Tel Aviv and Haifa, that's where I was. I love Haifa, of course, fantastic. Mount Carmel has of course, a huge spiritual significance for many religions, you know, in Haifa. And walking down from Mount Carmel down Ben Gurion Avenue, there's no better sight, in my view. And a bit of fresh air early in the morning.
I want to add another thing here, because if I want to be pleasantly diplomatic, I would ask for the Irish government, before they pass this law, they should invite a number of international lawyers from Israel or even from America as well, to lay down to them and explain to them the legitimacy and how they can't pass a law because there's no law which says that Israel is illegally occupying anything.
No.
You can't illegally occupy your own land, but let them hear from reputable international lawyers, invite them to come through the Irish Parliament to talk to them privately or publicly before making a catastrophic mistake, because it would have, that law they think would have legitimacy, would have no legitimacy whatsoever.
That's a positive note, Barry. That sentence you use yourself there to finish this part. We'll have to come back for the part two. Is you cannot illegally occupy your own country.
Yeah.
Your own. I think if you only thought about it.
And I want to tell you also, Ireland, I'm sure they weren't a party to the deal, but so the European Union were, and Britain was, of the Oslo Accord signed on the White House law.
Yes.
And the three areas were split into three: Area A, B, and C. This is what they call the West Bank. Area A is which we agreed that the Palestinian Authority should have full reign. That is their administration based in Ramallah, and that Area A would be under their both a civil and a military and security administration. Area B was agreed that area would be under the full Palestinian Authority, civil and joint security together with Israel. And Area C would remain as under Israel's civil administration and security and military administration until a permanent peace solution could be reached with the Palestinians, and we haven't done that yet. So even you're talking about those sort of figures, there's no illegal occupation because we haven't reached a permanent peace agreement with the Palestinians. And I want to tell you, let me end, if you like, with a private anecdote. In about a week's time, I'm going to take some of my wife's family members down from Jerusalem for a day or two in the Dead Sea. And I will be pointing out to them a couple of things. First of all, as we head down from Jerusalem through the Judean desert towards the Dead Sea, I will point out that I will be driving on a road which will have Israeli cars with Israeli number plates and cars with Palestinian number plates, right? Now, if I wanted to take them a left turn heading towards Jericho, I'll go about a mile and stop. And I'll point out, well, you should go there, by the way. It's a place of baptism by the River Jordan, where you can see the Christians come to be baptized in the River Jordan. This is in Israel. It's not in Jericho yet, which is under the Palestinian Authority. And on the other side of the river, you will see the Christians who have come in via Jordan, and you'll see the Jordanian soldiers on the other side, making sure everything is fine. Now, if I was to go another 200 yards behind that, I would come to a big sign, big red sign, which says in Arabic, Hebrew, and English, it is dangerous for Israeli vehicles to go past this point. So I won't go that far, but I'll continue down along the road with Palestinian cars. But if I was to go further on towards Jericho, a place I've been there several times in the past, before the Palestinian Authority took over, I would be putting my life at risk.
Just because you're a Jew?
Just because I'm a Jew and just because I'm an Israeli.
Well, Barry Shaw, it's been, we have only scratched the surface. There certainly will be, if you're amenable to a part two in a couple of weeks' time, again, we'll catch up with you. But it's been my pleasure, and I hope our viewers will find some more truth and enlightenment on the whole situation, the whole territory over there. And please educate yourself. Please make yourself aware. Please take off your tinted glasses from time to time and read about this conflict, the history of it, and really come to an understanding. And please, for God's sake, don't throw out those trite anti-Semitic lines now and again about illegal and occupier and all of this. It serves nobody, and it just goes to show the ignorance of yourself more so than anybody else, you know. Anyway, Barry Shaw, from this edition of LiR Confidential, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for giving over your time. And we will put up all the, you send me photographs, we'll put up at the end of the show the links to yourself and the links to your books where people can purchase some of those books as well, which is important. You have to sell books if you write them. And I'll be looking on Amazon myself for them now, you know. One or two of them took my eye, you know, and fantastic. I wasn't aware of them till now, only one of them. But that one, as I said, we didn't get to talk about. Maybe the next time we come across the one that I'm looking at there, 1917, that caught my eye. I will have it read by the time next time I speak to you, Barry, hopefully.
I want to thank you personally and your station for allowing this particular view, which may sound a harsh one and quite a dramatic one, but we're in a very dramatic time in our history right now. And I go back to what I said at the beginning. The Jewish psyche is one of being reminded all the time. In every generation, there are those who come and want to destroy us. And sadly, it's going on to today. And despite that, we try and do our best for peace. And whatever gesture we give, it seems to be taken in order for the staged destruction of our state. And we're never going to allow that to happen.
No, no. I wish you and your family the very best of health. And until we meet again, Barry Shaw, thank you very much and shalom.
Shalom. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, your viewers, for your support.